Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this fifth and last day of the G20 Interfaith Forum 2020. Throughout this gathering, 147 policymakers, religious representatives, scientists, and activists have shared their insights in 18 thematic sessions on the potential and impact of joint interfaith action. The discussions on peace-building, empowerment efforts of women and young people, tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, and protecting the environment were attended virtually by over 80,000 participants from 111 countries, 8,000. Those participants raised questions and engaged with each other on those topics. On behalf of the organizing partners, the G20 Association, the Keshishian International Dialogue Center, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, and the National Committee for Interfaith and Intercultural Dialogue in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the final day of the G20 Interfaith Forum 2020. As in previous days, today's sessions will be interpreted in Arabic, English, and Spanish, and I would kindly ask you to please refer to the buttons above and below the live stream to access your preferred language. Furthermore, there are supporting documents available for today's plenaries as well in the bottom left corner of this virtual environment, and we do encourage you to exchange with other participants in the chat on the right-hand side of the live stream. Please note that the chat is meant to be a safe space in which we ask you to remain respectful and dialogical, and please also note that offensive or abusive comments will be removed by our moderators. All the sessions have been recorded and are available on Keshishian's YouTube channel, and for selected highlights we invite you to also visit any of the partners' websites as well as social media. Today's plenary session will showcase the impact of religious actors and communities, particularly in crisis and when disaster strikes. And on this note, it is my great pleasure to invite our first speaker for today, His Holiness Catholicos Aram I Keshishian, Patriarch of the Catholicosate of Great House of Cilicia, to deliver his keynote remarks. Your Holiness, welcome. Please take the floor. Your Holiness, you may start.
Thank you. Thank you. At the outset of my few remarks, I want to challenge the way the role of religions or religious communities is defined as being responders to disasters. In my judgment, religions are primarily preventers and only then responders. Preventing and responding are integral to the very vocation of religion, and they are interconnected, conditioning and strengthening each other. And as such, they need to be addressed as one integrated whole. It is important to make a clear distinction in nature-related disasters, for example, earthquake, and human-related disasters, for example, global warming. In the case of first, the root causes are related to ecosystem, while in the case of second, to human being. The specific role of religion is determined by a given disaster. An effective prevention entails tackling the root causes of a problem and not just the symptoms. Setting a well-planned strategy, developing an integrated and coherent methodology, using properly human resources and tools of science and technology, and ensuring collective participatory process. Let me share with you briefly two examples. First, in medicine, according to medical experts, healthy lifestyle plays a vital role in avoiding several diseases. Second, making justice or restoring self-determination or respecting human rights prevents most of the conflicts facing the world. In case prevention strategy fails, and if avoiding a crisis or a disaster is beyond human reach, then responding becomes the only effective way of treating a disaster. Religion has an essential role to play to this end. I would like to identify two specific areas of crucial importance. First, according to estimates, the response to the coronavirus pandemic was, for many reasons, generally disorganized, incoherent, and insufficient, both nationally and globally. If medical response was slow and the response of politicians rather ambiguous, the response of faith communities was spontaneous and to a large degree well organized. All religions immediately got online. On the one hand, they instructed their communities to follow the recommendations of medical and civil authorities, and on the other hand, they organized emergency relief aids programs. In the face of the failure of preventive strategy, the crisis reduction engagement of religions was indeed a success. Second, the deterioration of the Earth's ecosystem deeply threatens the planet and its inhabitants. With their origin, nature, and scope, environmental issues are human-made disasters, and they pertain to humanity, creation-God relations. And therefore, they must be addressed in ethical perspective. The ecological crisis is due to abuse and misuse of the creation by human being and his unfaithfulness to God-given vocation, both in preventing and reducing of Earth-related disasters such as global warming. The role of religion is pivotal indeed. In disaster risk reduction, in my view, religion, with its broad networks, could play a major part by helping to early warning processes, by contributing to efforts aimed at peace with justice, by building broader partnerships at grassroots levels, by providing information and human resources, by promoting awareness building through people-oriented education, and beyond social action and humanitarian assistance, by working for healing and reconciliation. In conclusion, as essential part of civil society and as a major player in disaster risk prevention and reduction, religion, all religions in fact, must be taken more seriously by civil authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Holiness, for your excellent comments and drawing our attention to the importance of tackling root causes of problems, as well as giving very concrete and recent examples of how religious communities have engaged in addressing them. As we have heard, religious communities and leaders are essential preventers and influential responders when communities face upheaval and natural disasters. Today's plenary will reflect on the needs and achievements of religious actors in disaster response, as well as advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. It will be led and moderated by Her Excellency Dr. Thoraya Ahmed Ubaid, former member of the Shura Council on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and former Executive Director of the United Nations Populations Fund, as well as former United Nations Under-Secretary General. Dr. Ubaid, it is an honor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, may the peace and blessings, mercy and blessings of Allah be upon you.
I would like to thank Keynote and all its partners for making this very special event possible. I am honored to be among distinguished guests and leaders of thought and faith-based networks, as well as speakers from outside this spectrum. Secretary General Faisal bin Muammar has taken the bull by the horns, as it said, by venturing into the interfaith dialogue long before it became mainstream as it is now, making Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz, rest in peace, Allah yarhamu yutayyib tura, for this critical initiative. I remember my experience with introducing this subject at the United Nations Population Fund. When I was nominated by the government of Saudi Arabia for the post of executive director, I felt a wave of reactions around me. A woman from Saudi Arabia dealing with women empowerment agenda of UNFPA. So my professionalism was initially questioned because of both my nationality and my religion. But I believed in the power of people to change their own lives, because change can only come from inside. And for people to change, they need to have the courage to review their values and beliefs, expand those that make life better for everyone, and discard those that bring harm to their families. And as His Excellency said, His Holiness said, to bring healing and reconciliation to communities, especially for young girls and women. Our role was to provide a safe space for such discussion to take place. I was lucky to have at UNFPA a colleague and a dear friend, Dr. Azza Karam, who is now the Secretary General of Religions for Peace and who spoke in this forum. We established the largest network of faith NGOs among UN organizations within the context of gender, culture, and human rights. These faith NGOs provided and continue to provide reproductive health services to women in their communities, from maternal to child health, to safe motherhood, to protection from sexually transmitted diseases, especially HIV, to protection from violence against women and girls, and much more. In a sense, they were providing safe space for change to take place and exercising risk reduction for women and girls in their communities. The network also included faith-based leaders who were willing to speak out in support of ensuring the dignity of all people, especially the most vulnerable in the communities, and often they are women and girls. It was a rough road, but it's the combined power of both faith and commitment that allowed us to convince the other UN organizations to move in the same direction, and an interagency committee was established to coordinate the efforts of its members within the context of ensuring that faith-based organizations are active members in a positive way in multilateralism. Now to turn to this panel, COVID-19 has made everyone aware of the need to work together to mitigate the impact of this pandemic. Thus, risk reduction became a necessity, not only to deal with this pandemic, but also to build our resources and to learn from this experience to improve our collective response. We want to focus in this panel on three aspects. First, what have these organizations done to respond to the impact of the pandemic? Second, how have these organizations worked with each other across faith, within networks, with government services, with other NGOs in the communities? And three, what are the lessons learned for future risk reduction? Each distinguished panelist will have 5 to 7 minutes to speak, and I will signal that there are 2 minutes left, just at 5 minutes. We will pose some questions to the panelists as our colleagues are collecting these questions electronically from the chat. The panel is scheduled to end at 5:30, inshallah, and I hope to be able to end on time. I will be introducing the panelist list in few words, since their long accomplishments are clearly stated in the website of the panel. And the panelists, by the order of their last names, we will begin with Dr. Amal Habdam, member of the Board of National Human Rights Commission in Saudi Arabia, and advisor at the King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Center. It is not a religious-based NGO, but provides humanitarian services in various countries and communities. Dr. Amal, please present the center to us and its work as a humanitarian and relief association. Thank you.
In the name of God Almighty, the most gracious, the most merciful, may peace and Allah's blessings be upon you. Thank you, Dr. Soraya. It is my pleasure and honor to be here amongst you and to be part of this very interesting plenary. Now, as Dr. Soraya said, the King Salman Humanitarian Center is no religious center. It looks as its role to be a pioneer to provide aid and relief to the whole Islamic world and also to other countries, to provide help and relief for people who need it. Through cooperation and coordination with all religions and ethics. This is one of the priorities which the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has put for its aims. Now, since the beginning of COVID-19, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia tried to provide much help and much assistance in order to be able to provide help and relief to people according to the wise vision of His Majesty King Salman bin Abdulaziz of Saudi Arabia. It was one of the pioneer and a sort of roadmap in order to deal with the pandemic. And it also was implemented in accordance and in coordination with the help of international communities and countries. It worked on economic basis, social basis, and humanitarian basis in order to overcome all results of the pandemic and in order to concentrate on humanitarian aid and relief. the Saudi Arabia, is one of the largest donors, of course, in the field of humanitarian and development aid, in order to provide help to the international community with more than $10 million to different funds and relief agencies in order to fight against the pandemic. We provided $32 million to Yemen, Somalia, and Palestine. On the regional basis or local basis, we also provided help to all residents, may they be citizens of Saudi Arabia or also others, without holding them accountable, especially those who broke their residence visa. In 2015, King Salman opened a platform in order to be able to provide Saudi help through a transparent way and in coordination with all responsible agencies. Now you have these slides. We had different prominent field of initiatives, especially artificial limbs program, Massam project for landmine clearance in Yemen, child soldiers, etc. Now, in regard to this second question, in 2015, King Salman provided help through نعتذر عن عدم الترجمة نظرا لبعض المشاكل التقنية. As you might see on the next slide, we do provide help and assistance and relief to many countries over the whole world. We provide help to children, we provide help to people suffering from crises, and we provide free treatment, especially for children, in order to enable those children to grow up and find and set up their lives. Also, we provide programs for landmine clearance in Yemen. We also have the artificial limbs program. We have 5 projects in Yemen. We have the Massam project of landmine clearance in Yemen, as I mentioned. We have the child soldiers rehabilitation program in Yemen and projects focused on women and children. Now, as to the third questions regarding the lessons learned, the corona pandemic, of course, stopped the movement of people around the world. Now, as we all know, that every single inhabitant of the world has a different lesson to learn. And I think we have lessons to learn even years after the pandemic, after we overcome the pandemic. Therefore, we need to find new strategic priorities, especially in regard to education, research, scientific research, and health. Also, the scientific progress is not enough to provide health, but we need free health service, especially in regard to the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. We need an overall strategy in order to overcome this pandemic. We do also have many platforms, for instance, the platforms for help and assistance to visitors and also refugees in regard to health, nutrition, education, protection, and also in regard to the next slide. And another very important, let me also point out another very important program in regard to to the program of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in regard to the separation of Siamese twins. Here,
thank you very much, Dr. Amal.
We also have on the last slide, I'd like to point out different partners we work with. Of course, we do not have enough time to point out all the achievements and endeavors the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has achieved through the wise leadership of His Majesty the King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, who always provided us assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, and thank you for demonstrating the inclusive nature of the program that you are undertaking. And yes, one of the important. Can you hear me? One of the important lessons that you have mentioned is that as a result of COVID, we are all looking for solutions to strategic solutions. How do we rebuild again after the COVID? It's my honor now and pleasure to introduce Sister Sharon Eubank, LDC Charities and Relief of Society Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Sister Sharon, it's yours.
Thank you. I thank all my colleagues for their fine comments today and also earlier in the summit. The topic of this plenary is the commitment of faith networks to disaster risk reduction. And I want to address essential food and the disaster preparedness relationship network that helps support it in an emergency. The latest figures from the United Nations describe the severe drought and locust infestation, the global recession from the pandemic, and the measures taken to protect health. And then it states that 265 million people are now facing acute food insecurity. This is almost double what it was last year. Without being too alarmist, if we don't address this crisis in a coordinated manner, it is predicted to grow to be among the worst famines in human history. Latter-day Saint Charities mounted the largest response in its 35-year history to COVID-19 and the associated food crisis. So far this year, there have been 867 projects in 124 countries. Without exception, each project draws on trusted relationships with governments, communities, and other faiths. These relationships have been developed over a long period of time. And I mention this because with disaster upon us, the networks inevitably fray with the tension. These critical relationship networks are best if they're developed early and cared for carefully. So let me give briefly just some specific examples. The first is about creative new partnerships. You might have been like me to be shocked when you would see empty stores in the beginning of the pandemic. The New York Times reported that dairy farmers were dumping millions of gallons of milk because school programs were not buying milk. Potato and onion farmers were plowing their crops into the ground because there were no customers. And all of this during a time of exploding hunger. Supply chains were shriveling and traditional community networks were strained. However, people found creative solutions, including Latter-day Saint Charities, in the face of this crisis. They began purchasing milk and potatoes and other raw products. New partnerships with producers were formed. Local cheesemakers agreed to turn all that excess milk into Swiss cheese for food banks. Latter-day Saint Charities bought tons of potatoes and shipped them out to food pantries across the country. Surplus potatoes and milk were dehydrated for transport to other places. The old network was creative, the new partnerships were nimble, and it worked. The second thing I'd like to talk about is fasting as solidarity. Like many other faiths, Latter-day Saints have a deep tradition around fasting. For us, we don't eat for 24 hours and then donate the money we would have spent on food so that others may eat. I personally love the elegance that anyone can contribute at any level that's right for them and have a true impact. On April 10th, President Russell M. Nelson declared a worldwide fast and invited all people of all faiths to join, petitioning God for help and relief. The invitation drew millions of people together in a unified cause. I received dozens of messages, but let me just read one from my friends at Rahma Relief. Thank you very much for the invitation to fast, they said. Fasting for us is a great experience and one we observe throughout the entire month of Ramadan. My wife and I will observe the fast and pray for the safety of everyone, regardless of location or faith. The funds donated by people who fasted facilitated hundreds of thousands of meals for hungry people. It also brought a unique kind of solidarity and social cohesion that comes when people voluntarily cooperate. The third example is about immediate response. Hundreds of projects that I mentioned brought immediate food to families that were suddenly hungry. A typical example occurred in Iran when the father and the 8-year-old boy of a family who collected scrap metal for a broker were suddenly thrust into hunger when the father passed away of COVID-19. That young boy, trying as hard as he could not collect enough scrap metal to feed his sister and his mother. Through a partnership with Mothers Without Borders and the local community government, funding supplied from Latter-day Saint Charities brought additional food and help for that family over a long period of time, and hundreds of others. As supply chains fall apart, as drought worsens, as remittances don't show up, as the virus takes its death toll, food will be the issue of the day. Faith communities can provide ongoing support in these examples. Finally, I want to address longer-term preparedness. I believe it's a mistake to leave disaster response and preparation solely to governments and NGOs with their perceived high resources. I refuse to discount the impact of a family saving an extra tablespoon of rice poured each night into a soda bottle so that they can build a small reserve, or to keep an extra can of water stashed under the table. I applaud local communities who copy identity papers or procure a solar generator. I want every child to know the designated tree where they are to meet their family if they get separated. Families and communities that do these small things build self-determination. They know if they can solve these problems, they can solve other problems, and they don't necessarily have to wait for agencies. Will they need help? Of course, but they view themselves as actors instead of victims. And better than any shiny media campaign or more energetic than any United Nations development agenda, faith communities have the moral authority and the grassroots reach to encourage these resilient preparedness habits that serve society on every level. What can policymakers do to help faith leaders act most effectively? I have two suggestions. The first is to implement the Sendai framework questions designed to help communities think through their preparation. Have we formed a council of local leaders that includes faith leaders to coordinate in a disaster? Do households have emergency food and water for 72 hours? Has the community been mapped? Has the community tested its emergency plan? What more could we do to minimize the loss of life and damage that we're not doing now? And the second thing is to invite religious actors into the decision-making. Be as diverse and as inclusive as we can in consultation. Take the time to get to know strengths and gaps, develop personal relationships of trust and respect. I personally admire the ongoing work of Baroness Nicholson on this plenary and her Windsor dialogue that brought Yazidi religious leaders for the first time in close contact with other faith leaders in Iraq. When someone asked her, "How did you get them to come?" she said, "I asked them." Finally, in conclusion, I would say faith is as essential as food. As my respected colleague, Elder David A. Bednar, succinctly put it earlier this week, respecting the dignity of religious people pays important dividends. But these powerful opportunities and benefits are possible only if officials acknowledge that for believers and their faith communities, religion is essential to their identity and very being. Protecting the powerful and unique role of faith in society is one of the main achievable goals of the G20 Interfaith Forum, and I'm very glad to lend my voice to it and remain eager to hear the ongoing conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sister Sharon. I'm very touched that you have alerted us to this possibility of a disaster of hunger that is coming. And yes, networks are, as you said, are the way to work together to support people who have agency for themselves. And I agree with you. I think people have the resilience, they know what they need to do, and therefore they have the self-determination, and faith does help them bring that and strengthen them. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's my pleasure and honor as well to present Dr. Bandar Hajjar, President of the Islamic Development Bank. Dr. Hajjar?
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, distinguished dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allow me first to thank His Excellency Faisal bin Muammar, Secretary General of the International Dialogue Center, for inviting the Islamic Development Bank to this critical, highly interactive gathering. I am very honored to be with you today, representing almost a half-century-old institution established on the firm belief that the core ethical values embedded in the Islamic finance instrument can significantly impact communities, cities, nations' lives, and livelihood. The Islamic finance model is based on principles of sustainability, fairness, and equality. It considers social, environmental, and governance factors in any decision related to investment. This model's universality is derived from universal nature of the principle and value it upholds. Islamic finance is playing a role in supporting the development and welfare of the marginalized societies, mainly through traditional Islamic philanthropy tools and programs such as zakat, sadaqah, waqf. These tools have the most significant role to play in pursuit of their SDGs. We view the Islamic finance as a form of ethical and sustainable investment. It is a participatory economic model in acknowledging its crucial role in development. Islamic finance is growing globally. The United States and some countries in Europe, particularly Britain, have already introduced the model as a complementary to their conventional system. According to the 2016 report by Standard & Poor's, Islamic finance is especially relevant in addressing 12 of the 17 SDGs, and the Islamic Development Bank in 2015 released the report stating that Islamic finance addressing 9 out of 17 SDGs. Excellencies, distinguished dignitaries, let me now touch upon what the ISDB has been doing to address fragility and reduce the risk posed by disasters to the communities we serve. According to the OECD State of Fragility Report, 29 out of 58 fragile states are ISDB member countries. 70% of the global refugees and internally displaced people are from our member countries. 8 out of 12 refugee hosting countries are also ISDB member countries. Over the past 2 years, the ISDB has developed several policies, strategies, and action plans to prepare, to prevent, and swiftly respond to the increasing multidimensional challenges facing our member countries. These include fragility and resilience policy, disaster risk management policy, climate change policy, women and youth, and reverse linkage. The ISDB, guided by its new policy and strategy, promotes social cohesion, inclusion, and active participation of local, national, and regional stakeholders toward achieving impactful results on the ground that contribute to resilience building and long-term social and economic stability development. In 2020 was a rather challenging year for the world, so it is the case with our member countries affected by compound crises that eroded necessary social and productive infrastructure. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, the ISDB group has spared no effort to help its member countries fight the pandemic. It has rolled out the strategic preparedness and response program with the 3 R's: approach, respond, restore, and restart. The program aims to respond to the immediate health care needs, restoring social and economic asset, focusing on small and medium enterprises, jobs, livelihood, and restarting the economy that will ultimately contribute to 2030 agenda. Distinguished dignitaries, the ISDB has been instrumental in promoting education, women, youth empowerment, supporting refugees. These sectors area, I believe, are in line with the United Nations Alliance Civilization pillars. And the Islamic Development Bank's project in member states benefit both Muslims and non-Muslim citizens. The bank has also contributed to the establishment of many schools and hospitals and health centers for Muslims communities in non-member countries. Students and citizens from other religions study in this school as well. Despite the achievement, reducing risk in fragile contexts need more. It requires innovative and out-of-the-box solutions, tackling the root causes of the crisis and creating hope for the most vulnerable and hard-to-reach community. Since taking office as the ISDB president in 2016, I have decided to focus on developing capacity in science, technology, and innovation, reducing the threat posed by disasters will require new technology solutions and innovation designed domestically by the people who know best the environment. The Transform Fund has received expressions of interest from more than 122 countries to join the recently launched 1 million special allocation. Another pillar of transformation is to turn the ISDB into a bank for development and developers. The convergence takes form in economic empowerment approach that we advocate and resolve to build partnership with the broad range of actors and institutions. Economic empowerment approach is a paradigm shift from merely achieving the targeted beneficiary financial inclusion to accomplish their full economic inclusion. It is effective win-win pro-poor business intervention. Several ISDB interventions applied to the economic empowerment. We have recently launched the Strengthening Economic Resilience and Vulnerable Enterprise, we call it SERV program, that help address the urgent and long-term need for small and medium enterprise. Let me conclude by highlighting the crucial importance of partnership, illustrating that by initiative we launched in 2019 with UNIDEP development partners and international NGOs to help over 100,000 young refugees gain access to education and economic opportunities, and the international aggregate. So here the financial strength recognized by our AAA rating institution. Still, it's not enough. Having decentralized and created 11 regional hubs in our 4-continent operating, but it is not enough. The SDG 17 is critical.
Thank you.
We need to develop 3 Ps for private, public, philanthropist, people partnership. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Saraya. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Hajjar. Thank you very much for saying that the Islamic Bank really needs your thinking and you're working out of the box, because the issues are becoming more complex and thinking out of the box is the right way to go. I would like now again for my pleasure and to meet for the first time Reverend Andrew Morley, President and CEO of the World Vision International. You're most welcome, please.
Thank you so much and welcome, and it's great to be here with the dignitaries and your excellencies and friends. As you see, my name is Andrew Morley. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of World Vision International. World Vision is one of the largest NGOs in the world. We operate in 100 countries. We serve people of all faiths and none, but we ourselves are a Christian organization. And if you look at this picture is from Goma in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. What do you see when you look at this picture? It's quite a common sight for us these days where we have a gun pointed to our heads to check our temperatures. Now, in an environment like Goma in the Eastern DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, having a gun pointed at your head means something completely different. And this was one of the things that we found as we helped in the Ebola response over the last few years, and also as we help now in the COVID response. In a context like the Eastern DRC, guns are a very scary thing. And to have one pointed at your head, even if it's a white one that's supposed to be taking your temperature, is also very scary. So it can bring all kinds of trauma. And that's quite obvious that it is so dramatic and such a traumatic experience for children and for adults. We work mainly with children, but we also build infrastructure at World Vision to help children. And this is one of the ways where faith partners come in. If you just move to the next slide, this is where I met faith partners again in Goma in the Eastern DRC. These are pastors, imams from around the country, religious leaders who are trusted by their communities. And what they did is that they used their influence, they used their impact and authority to help people in their communities understand that these guns, these white guns, were actually good, in that they help you to understand your temperature and to know that you're safe if you're entering a place of worship or if you're entering a place where other people are. And the way they did this is they stood up front in their mosques, in their churches, and they allowed people to take their temperature very visibly in the front of their congregations. And there was lots of suspicion to overcome. So many people thought that they could catch Ebola or COVID from these thermometers, that these would actually give them the disease. And so one pastor told me that only after he'd stood in front of his congregation with a gun pointed at his head, but a temperature gun, did his congregation allow people to take their temperatures as they walked into the mosque. And by doing that, then next time they had requested a temperature check, when they were revisiting the city or moving into a busy environment, that they then allowed the temperatures to be taken. The same is true for masks. Masks were seen as something that was scary, something that was alien to people in this context. And again, the church leaders and the leaders of the mosque, the imams, stood in front of their congregations with masks on and were very visible in modelling the right behaviour. And we helped by providing masks, we helped by providing information that they could share on how people can stay safe with COVID. And it's meant that that area is now better prepared than many in Africa to address the risk of COVID. And this photo was taken in February this year. This was my last visit to the field before lockdown. And so if you look at the next slide, you'll see that this is World Vision. This is our name in Latin America in Spanish. And again, this is a picture where faith leaders can make such a difference. These are COVID packs, we call them, which is food, it's face masks, it's hand wash, that's provided to the most desperately needy families through faith leaders. And they're able to identify families in their congregation, and they can provide spiritual support as well as practical support for those that really need it right now. The other thing that we found that faith leaders can really provide is information and just help for families as they battle against the issue of child violence. And so they can start to talk about good practices for child prevention, again, particularly in lockdown. Let me just talk about the scale of World Vision when it comes to faith workers. We have 400,000 faith workers, almost 500,000 in 50 countries that we've worked with over the last 10 years. And it's key that together we can work through and with faith leaders to bring and be the change that they want to be. Just onto the last slide now, just as I conclude. This is a picture from Azraq refugee camp. This is Ami in Jordan. And he told me how in a refugee camp, in a very difficult place, it was his faith leader that gave him hope. And it was through his faith leader that they would provide a psychosocial support, which is so important for refugees. So once again, to conclude, faith leaders are on the ground, they're trusted, and we don't think of them as a resource, we think of them as partners. And so we try to work with them to be the change and to model the change that they want to see in their communities. And that is the power of partnership with faith leaders. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Reverend Morley. Certainly, you gave one of the very important examples of how to recognize the fear of people and to work with it, and then by example, to help them remove that fear and adopt the positive behaviors. And certainly the lessons that the places of faith are also safe places where people can find solutions and comforts. Thank you very much. We move now to our fourth speaker, and it's really an honor to see Baroness Emma Nicholson. I had met her a long time ago, and I'm happy to see her here when she was working on the project in Iraq. And Baroness Nicholson is in the House of Lords, and she supports various NGOs to improve the lives of people. Baroness Nicholson, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Thoraya. It's a particular pleasure to work again with you. Absolutely delightful. We did great things earlier, and perhaps there's another opportunity after this important conference to do some more together. First, may I say a very warm thank you for the very kind invitation for 2020 G20 Interfaith Forum that I could spend a few minutes with you. I also take this opportunity to thank the Interfaith Forum for inviting me to join them in the Netherlands in 2019, which was an absolutely fascinating couple of days, and I highly, highly valued it. Thank you so much. If I could speak my remarks in the context of the Aram Foundation, which has already been mentioned most kindly by Sister Sharon Eubank of LDS Charities and the Relief Society Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In that context, which is also the context that you have just mentioned, I'd like to frame my remarks within that pattern. The Ammar Foundation, we started work in Iraq and Iran and Lebanon and in the area generally, but have also been working for a long time in the Eastern and Central Europe and in one or two other parts of the world. We've just begun in Africa. And the purpose of the Ammar Foundation is most clearly to help other people in difficulty, but specifically to manage cooperation and coordination rather than conflict and opposition. So when we started work in 2014 with the Yazidi people, already mentioned and in greatest difficulty because they've been the victims of one of the worst crises that humanity can create, which is religious persecution, one of the very, very most vile acts that humans inflict on others. It was very clear that our cooperation and coordination pattern, which we had been fulfilling since our foundation in 1991, was exactly what was needed. So we have been working closely with several crucial partnerships. One is with LDS Charities, as I've just mentioned, with Sister Sharon Eubank and with her colleagues. We have a solid partnership agreement, which from time to time we refresh in writing so we know why we're doing, between the Ammar Foundation and LDS Charities of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we have built up tremendous friendships on both sides. Ammar is based in England, in Westminster, but it's also based in Iraq. It was working for a long time in Iran, but not at the moment. And we've done a huge amount of work in Lebanon and a vast but different tranche of work in Romania and other areas in Central and Eastern Europe, other countries there, about 8 countries I think it is now. So the first partnership for LDS Charities was with Sharon Eubank and myself to try to help the Yazidis. That was that partnership. Then we moved immediately because it was clear that the Yazidis have a different faith to one that we knew about. And so the first thing to do was to make a partnership with them and ask if they needed help. So Ammar has had, from the very beginning in 2014, when the assaults on them began, we've had a strong partnership with the spiritual council of the Yazidis. And indeed, one of our most important pieces of work has been to comprehend through their eyes exactly how their faith works, what it means, what it matters to them, and how they perform it. And we have a superlative paper which the Yazidi Spiritual Council and the Prince of the Yazidis signed off and said that it was the first and only accurate understanding of their faith that they had ever seen other than their own. Now, moving on from there, it was clear that more partnerships were needed. So I borrowed the Bishop's Bench in the House of Lords and attracted very good support and understanding from some of the bishops there. I belong to the Anglican community in England, and so naturally I went to them. And then we broadened that, and we have a number of other faiths, including not just other strands of our own, but in order other faiths globally to get that support. And in a sense, that cooperation and coordination seems absolutely vital. Our staff have always been Muslim, and now also Yazidi, plus some others. But the Muslim staff themselves, therefore, they are experts. They're experts in education, they're experts in public health, and they are experts in engineering and other disciplines. They are the stars of our show, if you like it. It is they who I think first of when we are gathering and needing support, because they are the experts, they are the professionals, and it is they whose work we are supporting. Beyond them, we have the victims, or we have the patients, or we have the pupils. And in the last 30 years, we've managed to deliver with very, very low cost. We've managed to deliver, I think it's 11 million medical consultations to the poorest of the poor, and of course a huge amount of things like food and clothing and all the rest of it. But essentially we're after building up people's health, physical and mental. Now, it's very easy to do this and to gather a small number of people together and to help them get on together. It seems to me the great difficulty is managing to push that further forward. How to get something moving that then others will be attracted to and may find comfort in themselves and may find a desire to fulfill those same missions elsewhere. And that, of course, is where we come to our multi-faith networks. And, of course, one of our problems is that so many faiths are in conflict with each other, which is why I think our lesson in the Aram is understand and respect the other, agree that you won't have exactly the same points of view, you may not quite have the same ideas even about faith, even about all sorts of things like that. But there will be many, many more things in which we can cooperate and can make friends. And if I could leave you with a final thought, not from religion, but Thomas Paine in 1778, he encapsulated in a short paragraph a letter addressed to Abbé Raynal in 1778. He encapsulated, far better than I have said, the philosophy that I've just been sharing. He commented, he wrote, "Science, the partisan of no country, but the beneficent patroness of all, has liberally opened a temple where all may meet. Her influence on the mind, like the sun on the chilled earth, has long been preparing it for higher cultivation and further improvement. The philosopher of one country sees not an enemy in the philosophy of another. He takes his seat in the temple of science and asks not who sits beside him." So my question to us all is, how can we use our deep faith commitments to make a situation exist globally where the faiths do the same, as Thomas Paine was demanding of the scientists? In other words, to stop any conflict between ourselves, because if we're all together, we can resolve the problems of the globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Baroness Nicholson. And thank you. I believe Amar, the NGO in Arabic, is I'mar, which means to build the lives of people, to build something positively. And thank you very much for your last words. We come to our last speaker in the panel, but of course there will be questions and a dialogue. Mr. Fadlallah Wilmot, who's the regional manager for the Middle East and Africa for Muslim Aid. Please, it's yours. Mr. Wilmot?
Sorry, I forgot to switch on my mic. Okay, can you hear me? Can I be heard now?
Yes, we can hear.
Can you hear me? Okay, fine. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me to this fantastic meeting. I've worked for two of the largest Muslim organizations in the world, Islamic Relief and Muslim Aid. And so I will try to look at the three questions. My first experience was in Aceh after the tsunami. And in the Quran, there are three terminologies related to disasters: musibah, which is a misfortune or a disaster; bala, a trial; azab, a penalty or a punishment. And some people came to Aceh after the tsunami accusing the Achenese of being punished for their sins, which is a very distressing and sad thing to happen when you've lost your family, your everything, your possessions. So the chief imam of the mosque in Aceh said, and he said, listen, musiba is a natural disaster. It happens. It's going to happen, and it will happen. But what the important thing for us to do after this disaster is, how do we manage it? How do we respond? How do we... And that is our faith. He helped to modify this sort of negative impression about a disaster. And so, therefore, religious beliefs can be positive, but they could also create negative attitudes within the community. Even creation, they could even create rivalry. For example, in Samoa, after a tsunami, some of the low-income families who didn't contribute to the church were left off the initial response. Some people in Aceh who were not on the shore didn't get included in the response, even though their homes were destroyed by the earthquake. So, even so, religious beliefs affect the majority of people living in the world today. So they're part of a people's culture. They're a key role in people's daily life. They connect society. So it can play a positive role, but we also must always be aware of the possible negative. It can also be important in reducing or avoiding the impact of natural disasters and climate change. So we need to bring together, and the experience that I have in many countries, in Indonesia, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sudan, and Somalia, is that we need to be able to bring together the private sector, civil society, academia, NGOs, and to include religious leaders in this effort. We found that preparing Friday sermons about disaster risk reduction and hazards and dealing with COVID. There was a very good project in Bangladesh about violence against children, together with World Vision. So the religious leaders play a really important role in providing information which is received by the community in a positive manner. And they, as I said, they can also help in educating people about the virus. Especially, we were involved a lot with refugees and IDPs who live in very enclosed spaces with very little possibility of social distancing for retaining hygiene. So the role of religious leaders in providing information about that is really, really very important. And in Indonesia, the two largest Islamic organizations in the country, Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, played a very important role in advocating for the rights of persons with disabilities from an Islamic perspective. Now, to answer question number 2, I think the religious leaders have a very important role because of their respect, because of their influence. They can provide public health information, they can provide disaster risk reduction, they can provide support for climate change adaptation, and they can partner with many other organizations to help the community face disasters and build resilience to hazards and to deal with the climate change adaptation. And I think religious leaders were very important. Pardon? What did you say?
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay. Okay, fine. And then if we remember back to the Ebola crisis and also about the COVID crisis, the issue of burials, religious leaders played a very important role in advising communities how to deal with the issue of a burial without infecting other people. And also religious leaders played a very important role in getting people to accept social distancing in places of worship. I think these are some of the examples. And finally, the third issue of structures to increase, I would say this part, as was here, the Sendai framework of 2015-2035, it stresses the need for community-based, cultural sensitive DRR policies. And I think religious leaders do play an important role in that. Religious leaders also can help, especially with DRR, with climate change adaptation, and for social inclusion, for guidance, for leadership, and spiritual support, which is very important after a disaster. There was a study a colleague of mine did after a Padang earthquake in Indonesia in 2009 of both the Confucian and the Muslim communities, and it showed that faith-based community organizations in the city helped and guided their community to cope with the disaster and later on to become more resilient with the knowledge and resources that they had. And as I said, in Aceh, the information about religion and disasters was found in Friday sermons, in religious activities, in other activities in the mosque. So they found a meaning behind the disaster. They could change their behavior to avoid the next disaster. And the same concept was used by the Buddhist community in Japan after the 2011 earthquake.
Thank you.
I have to wind up now. Okay, fine. So these are the points that I would like to make, that religious leaders can play a very big role, but we also must be very careful not to have any negative impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ulmat. I think you raised many of the issues, or what has been said before, you kind of sense brought it together. And if we learn anything from all the distinguished speakers, I think that one, religious leaders have a role to play. Faith institutions provide safe space. They provide education. They lead by example. They bring social inclusion for people with the spiritual support. But most of all of that together builds resilience in communities so they can deal with disasters in a much more organized and much more internally as human beings, stronger persons. Thank you very much. We have some time for some questions. We have already one question that has come in, and it is for Dr. Hajjar. Dr. Hajjar, the question says, how can Islamic banks help in facing crisis and reduce human disasters? We can't hear you. I think you've frozen, Dr. Hajjar. The second question, it's really for whoever would like to take the question: how to invest in religious discourse to overcome the impact of disasters and humanitarian crisis on the behavior of individuals and groups. You can see now young people are not abiding by the COVID requirements, etc. How can the religious discourse, really change the behavior of individuals and groups? Who would like to take this, begin with the answer? Are you hearing me? Sister Sharon, would you like to take it?
Thank you very much. I'm sure that there are many responses that this panel can give, because this is a very broad question, and I appreciate Reverend Morley has already dealt with this a little bit, discussing what was able to happen in DR Congo, and also just Mr. Wilmot describing what has just been very successfully happening after the tsunami in Southeast Asia. I believe that one of the most powerful responses to this is not just the power of what a faith leader can do within his or her own congregation, but the connection of faith leaders to each other, whose traditions may be very different. And so there are many kinds of interfaith councils or local governments that can convene interfaith, because people need to get to know each other and have strong relationships before that disaster strikes. So as problems come up, like mask wearing or fear about having your temperature taken, something like this, there are certain things that we do within our own faith traditions, but there are many things that we can learn from each other. And the dialogue, like we're having here, to be able to have in a small community with the different faith leaders there, would be very, very powerful to learn from each other and best practices from our own traditions. So I might toss this to some of my colleagues on the panel. What have you seen in your own experience that has been effective?
Reverend?
And it's already been mentioned that we have worked with other agencies, with Islamic Relief and others, to try to build some of the relationships that sisters just mentioned, where local faith communities, local faith leaders come together, cross-faith, but on issues that are important and critical for their communities, such as mask wearing, temperature taking, but even that visibility of coming together can bring peace and harmony to communities where historic and sometimes very long held issues across faiths can actually disappear very quickly, where they very visibly work together to provide humanitarian and relief initiatives in their regions. So even that visibility of, we call them channels of hope. So we say that these are new channels of hope in communities where people cross faith come together, and it's been really powerful. And it's one of the lower cost interventions, because you provide tea, coffee, biscuits, an environment for people to meet and encourage them to meet, but it's very powerful. So I would reinforce what's been said by some of my other esteemed colleagues on the panel, but that can be even the visibility of this cross-faith collaboration is very powerful.
I'd like to go back to Dr. Hajjar.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for that. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, and the question was, how can the Islamic Bank help in facing crisis and reducing disasters?
Yes, first of all, the challenges facing the world in general and developing countries in particular is huge and complicated and beyond the capacity of an individual government or institutions or individuals. And this is why the Islamic Development Bank, we shifted from the Bank of Development to the Bank of Developers and Development. Developers refers to the government, private sector, NGOs, civil societies, universities, research centers, philanthropists, and all these things. So these kind of challenges facing us, we need really to work collectively, and this is why we change it from 3 Ps, public-private partnership, to 5 Ps, public-private philanthropist people partnership. And we are, in fact, trying to build inclusive, sustainable resilience economy that enable these countries to face the risk before it comes. Islamic banks also, I just want to mention that this is very important. We are partnered with non-Muslims NGOs. For instance, we have partnered up with the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative flagship program. This is to empower 168 youth and as partner and leaders in promotion peace and sustainable development in in the most vulnerable district in North Uganda and others. So just to conclude that partnership with everyone, with all agencies, is very important and crucial in order to be able to address all the challenges facing our the people and especially the poor countries.
Thank you, Dr. Hajjar. I'd like to ask a question to all of you who are working in the field. Your hands are in hot water. Can you tell us, with all this challenge, and I'm focusing on COVID and its impact on communities, can you tell us how, in your view, how do these communities interpret where are we going with COVID? Will it end? Will it not end? How do they feel about it? How do they react to it? And do they feel empowered to be able to deal with it as a community, as individuals, as families? Because there is so much, people are tired of closing, tired of many aspects dealing with it, and the mental state of people is impacting. So how do these communities try to adjust and accept the fact that it might be long-lived? Who would like to venture first?
I think the thing I've always worked from is that everyone else is considerably more interesting than you are yourself. And so the excitement is to find out about them. And for most people, in my opinion and experience, their faith is a huge part of who they are. Indeed, it's an integral part. There's about a dozen things that make us up, isn't there? There's our tribe, our family, the way we live, where we're actually born. But faith is at the heart of most of that. So one of the most interesting things to discover about someone else is what they feel about why we're here. Why are we on Earth? Where are we going? What's it all about? Where are we trying to land up? And along the way, do we agree that one of the main purposes of being alive is to do good? So the excitement of discovering that, and then finding you share what I would call common values. Yes, and there's a small proportion of humans who don't. But the more you look, the more you realize that quite a lot of those can be persuaded, and therefore it's quite a small number by the end who think very, very differently indeed, and, really rather negatively about other people. But the excitement, therefore, is discovering the commonalities and then the different ways in which those commonalities are lived, expressed, and understood and taught. And then you find out, of course, we're all much the same, and we have quite a lot of wonderful variations, but nearly all of those variations are highly positive, and it's more exciting to discover them, to get closer to them, to support them, than it is to leave it aside. So, new friendships and rather more.
Thank you very much, Baroness Nicholson. We have 5 minutes, I'm told. So if we go around and think, what is one message you would like to give out of this discussion we had? One message to the world that we need to take with us as we leave and bid each other farewell. Who would like to start? Dr. Hajjar? Dr. Hajjar.
Yes, thank you. I think we were not prepared for this pandemic, and also will not be prepared for the coming pandemic probably in the future. So it is very important to focus on the root causes of the problems rather than the symptoms. And also, if we don't really benefit from the lesson learned from this pandemic, we will not be able to face the future if it carries the same problems. So, and we need really a paradigm shift. We need to think out of the box, and we need to work collectively in order to be able to address all these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I call on Sister Sharon?
Thank you very much. I have been very energized by the comments that have been shared today, and they certainly reflect my own feelings. If I would leave one thing, it would be that the pandemic has revealed to us something that's scarier than a global health pandemic, and it is the weaknesses that we have in mistrust, in misinformation, in not being able to cooperate together. And I believe this is a warning for us. The global health pandemic will be resolved. We will find vaccines and interventions, but we are now alerted to this worse pandemic of the misinformation, mistrust, and lack of coordination among us. And this is what we must tackle going forward. And I believe that the G20 Interfaith Forum is a critical part of being able to address that.
Thank you very much. Can I go to Reverend Morley?
Yes, I think I would very much echo the previous comments, but we are called to be channels of hope. So Baroness Nicholson said that we're on this earth to do good. We're on this earth to make a positive difference, to make it a better place than when we started. And we at World Vision start with our faith, which is a Christian faith, but we know that only by working together across all faiths can we be the change in the world that we want to see. So only then can we model that change and live that change that we want to see in the world.
Dr. Amal? Dr. Amal? Can you hear me?
Yes, I stress on what my dear colleagues have mentioned before, and I stress that belief is key in tackling this crisis, and that humanitarian aid and humanitarian work can help tackle this crisis and other crises, especially in the realm of technological and scientific innovation and research and humanitarian aid for the tackling of the future crisis in the world. And thank you.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Wilmot?
Okay, I couldn't hear you. I would say the message is that we are facing an unprecedented crisis, COVID and the climate change, and there's never been a more urgent time to work together for the benefit of everybody. And I think this is the message that we should give, that we have to work together with all religions, with all faiths, in order to face the challenges that humanity is facing now.
Thank you very much, Eva. If I can join you in what I learned from this discussion, again, it reaffirmed what I always believe, that the only way is for us to work together across faith, across communities, and empowering people themselves at the communities to be able to change their own lives and to be part of the solution to face disasters and to plan with us how to deal with any forthcoming disasters. I thank each one of you. I think I'm enriched by the discussion. I'm enriched by your experiences. And we pray that to all of our beliefs, in all our beliefs, that we will move out of the crisis in which we find ourselves, but we will learn lessons and be stronger for any forthcoming disaster. God bless you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Obaid, for your expert lead of this highly relevant and excellent plenary. Over the past 5 days, we have seen firsthand the contribution that religious actors and communities are already making to achieving Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. In this context, Keynote has also been working to profile the stories of some of these actors around the world, and we're excited to give you a preview of this project during the break. Faith for SDGs project is a digital storytelling series which shows the enormous contribution of faith-based organizations and religious communities to sustainable development and humanitarian aid, which will be launched this coming Thursday on October 22nd. After the 15-minute break, please join us for the closing plenary where we discuss the impact of this event and how the recommendations raised will be taken forward. Thank you all very much. See you soon.
Do we stay on this link or do we have to have